Welcome.
Hello everybody and welcome to another Phantom Menace deep dive. So this one is 5M3 Anakin's Test. I'm quite excited by it actually because I also wanted to perhaps briefly at first, because I haven't done quite enough research on this yet, is to talk about quartal and quintal harmony, because that does crop up quite a lot in Williams's work. We'll come back to that probably at the end. But let's just dive in and have a look at it. So I'm just going to stop it there. There's so much in this, actually, because it just sort of changes harmony pretty much every bar. So the harmonic rhythm is sort of at first minims, then semibreves, then minims again. So it's really interesting how it sort of changes. It's quite vertical, this one, in many ways, as it starts off. So, as I said at the top, lots of interest here. Themes harmonise in interesting and rich ways, yes. Brief melodic fragments and little bits of nuance. Sums it up pretty well, actually, when I think by the time we have a look at it, I think that will work quite well. So the first thing is the chords at the top. So I've put, it's definitely a polychord of some description. It's quite difficult to read, actually. But we've got that sort of D sharp minor. It's sort of dreadfully written. But then E flat major 7, but omit the 5 and have an A in the bass. So really extraordinary sort of polychord at that point. It's more understandable if we take 522 as a sort of conglomerate of it. Because that's taken from a 6Z44 collection. Wow. All these sort of extraordinary things. It just means that, you know, there are possibilities where you can get those notes in that order. What I find interesting is that he keeps the sort of very tonal element at the top and keeps the sort of dissonant element in the bass. In other words, that you've got your E flat minor chord at the top, and then we've got that chord there, which is sort of I guess an E flat chord with a 7th, minor 7th, but without the 3rd. And then we've got this intrusive, let's call it wrong bass or wrong note A, which sounds like a sort of almost like a sort of equivalent of a 3rd inversion chord, basically. In terms of its behavior, it's just it doesn't resolve low. It keeps itself there. The other interesting thing is that we've also got E flat established as a sort of tonality in some way. In fact, you know, here E flat minor, and then I don't think it's insignificant that it then goes to an E flat chord. At that point there, and then it sort of goes through this sort of nice augmented thing with first inversions as well. So it's really interesting. You know, 522 subset of 619B, but also possibly 6Z44, more likely to be 6Z44 because of the fact that it becomes 6Z44 in the second minim. So another sort of polytonal chord. So I've put E flat minor chord with a flat 6 above, E flat major 7, omit the 5 with an A in the bass. Not quite sure how we would get to that. But I think it's possible because if you've got the notes of 6Z44, then it's doable. In fact, any sort of these sort of scale forms that we've been discussing before, you know, deriving chords out of them is not difficult. You just derive a chord out of it. There's going to be, you know, some sort of triad somewhere. And then we can just rearrange it. What I find interesting is the fact that, you know, often his trombones and tuba are absolutely as the harmonic series would go in terms of distance and space between them. So you've got tuba, trombone 3. I think that would be a tenor trombone, really. He has 4, 4th being the bass one, and then 2 at the top with thirds. So you know, that sort of configuration is quite normal, situation normal. So then we've got straight into a sort of E flat. So we've got this sort of very gnarly sort of bit. And then it disappears. That A's gone. Then it goes to a sort of, let's call it bog standard harmony. Sort of is. Still rich with these inner parts as well. Interesting doubling here, actually, isn't it? Sort of second violins with cellos as well, or at least first cellos. you know, it's always the thing that you're told not to do in a sort of chorale situation where, you know, it's better not to double any notes of motion, anything that needs suspending or whatever. But here, no, it doesn't matter at all. And in fact, it does draw emphasis onto it. That's what we want. Or what, at least what Williams wants. Then we've got D flat F, basically first inversion chord, or C sharp and E. And then it just drops down a semitone. Literally exactly the same sort of thing, planed that way. And then we've got this lovely horn solo which creeps in as well. So let's just recap a little bit of that. Really, really nice. And he's put a little sneaky 419B there, so major chord with the flat 6. So in this case, it's a sort of second inversion type with the G in the bass, so the 5th from the root as well. So that's in the violins. It becomes 521B at that point. So remember that sort of configuration when you've got a major triad, flat 6, then the major 7th, that becomes 521B, and then it's a subset of one of those 620, I think. Yeah, one of those. Or 6Z19B as well. In a sense, it doesn't really matter. It's just that they're always seed chords. So the 5-note chord with that, it is sort of inevitable. You know, you could keep going. As well, and it would eventually end up in either 6Z19B or 620. The next one is that once we've got all those notes, as soon as you start introducing the B flat, and I would imagine that's just, let's call it an anticipation note, but it is anticipating the next chord here. So with those notes, we've actually got a 634A, which is called a mystic chord, just simply because that is used in Scriabin's Prometheus, and it's a collection of quartal notes, like that. And all of those notes appear in these two bars, which I find really interesting. And he does use that chord quite sparingly, so we've probably seen it only 3 or 4 times in the entire film at this point. But he does it to sort of conjure up mystery. I suppose, why wouldn't you, being the mystic chord? It's just it's not a mystic chord in the sense of telescoped or verticalized 4ths and 5ths. So he's keeping it much more in close position. And then it goes straight into Anakin's theme in sort of A. So he leads into it by just descending from an F to an E, which is going to A minor, sort of A minor. It's just there's a little bit of chromaticism around that as well, which I find appealing. So let's carry on. So much going on there, isn't there? Let's just recap and listen to it again, because it's full of interest. Let's keep going back, sorry. So those little sort of stabs, interesting. So this is all from the harmonic major scale. So in the bass clef. Maybe it's easier to think of it as ascending melodic minor on A with a sharp 4. Yeah, I think it is easier to think of it that way, actually. So we've got that. Then we've got this sort of mixed mode, completely bitonal. So we've got this completely different, totally unrelated. So D flat with a major 7th. Like that. But it doesn't sound like that at all because of the thirds. So we've got all of that going on. Then it goes into a double harmonic major on E, or a Hungarian minor on A. In other words, all of those notes are present in all of the parts as well. So we're expecting G sharps and D sharps. And probably F naturals, but he could even change it. It doesn't really make a massive amount of difference. At the moment, we've got F naturals. So I said this is an extraordinary passage, really, from A minor, a sort of A minor, to A melodic minor with a sharp 4, then a Hungarian minor on A for 4 measures as well. It's really amazing how it morphs. And then let's look at this bass line here. So we've got these lovely sort of quartal chords. So those are just some of the notes of the Hungarian minor. In fact, the first 4 notes of the scale, but with the 4th and the bass. Then it goes to another 3-3-B. So that major minor chord. So in this case, like that, sort of starting on G sharp. It's difficult to see because of the way it's written. But if you imagine that the G sharp is an A flat, and the B is a C flat, and the C is a C natural, then we've got that 3-3. So as a pedal, that's really interesting because we know that he can go into lots of different areas from that. And then we've got more of the Hungarian minor chord with a little bit of sort of nuance. And he feels it's fine to just sort of digress out of that at that point and make it interesting. And that's a completely normal thing to do. Don't forget, this is all with Anakin's theme. So, E major with a flat 6. Yep. Also E major with a sharp 4. And you got that little sort of crunch at that point. Now a chromatic descent in the strings. A melodic 3-3-B drawn from the harmony. Fragments of Anakin's theme. So here, just look at that bass line. So again, our Star Wars chord, 419B, so C major with a flat 6 and the B. And then it goes into the 4th theme. That's the first time we hear the root. I really like that flute and celeste part as it does that. It's really nice. Just play it again. Really nice. And lovely, beautiful G accented passing note, where it sort of grows out from this F minor chord. Really, really nice voice leading. It's very sort of wistful. Wonderful. And that's really nice how that oboe, or the flobo as I call it, because Phrygian oboe, it's got a bassoon as well, a couple of octaves lower, but 3 octaves lower. So then I just does that on the change. So it's really nice. Really, really good. I don't think there's an F in there. I just made that up. Let's just listen to that again. So into a B flat, first inversion, now the root, now G flat. So this is the insert at this point, which he changed. A sort of Lydian flavour, F sharp. Now we're back into A. For some reason I didn't put an octave above there. I think it was just easier to read. Very, very quiet. So I've upped the audio level on this a little bit. But basically it's just hints of Hungarian minor in A with the odd sort of E flat or D sharp. Now we're getting into it. So let's just play this next bit. I'm sort of scooting over that because it is not much of interest. It's just sort of fiddling around with Hungarian minor. Let's go from the horn entry. And then it goes back into another sort of 6Z19B type sort of thing. So this is really interesting. So melodically, it's got that sort of Phrygian mode flavour. So in other words, sort of all white notes at that point. But it does also feel very quartal. That sort of idea. So we've got an E in the bass, A, B, and then D. So it's a really interesting sort of span of melody, sort of just one octave, really. Like that, with all of those notes. So E, F, A, B, D. So in terms of harmonising it, so he actually starts with an F. Yeah, so an F major chord would be normal in a Phrygian mode. So that's chord 2. Notice it's in second inversion. But now he's sort of, you know, making it into a more understandable sort of regular minor. It's not quite, is it? Sort of, it's more sort of Hungarian, not Hungarian, harmonic major. There we go. Then in F, with a sort of suspension or upwardly resolving suspension or a retardation. And now a D sus2, so he's going into this sort of quartal idea. So D sus2, which becomes E minor 6 with a sus flat 2. And I love that sort of like little bit of, just notice the sort of augmented flavour going to C. So another 419B. Then we're into this sort of really extraordinary sort of thing. So it could be drawn from 6Z19B or 620. It's just those notes there. Yeah, so we got G, so drawn from there, A flat, B, C, all sorts of different things. So that's a 4-7. Big deal. It doesn't really matter. But it's just those notes will work. I think from a harmonic major again. But that flat 2. Then it becomes C minor harmonic. So expecting E flats, we got them, and expecting A flats and B naturals, which we've also got as well. So that descends, and then we've got this really extraordinary sort of polychord thing, which seems to be slightly missed off here, but G sharp minor at the top, that's quite easy to spot, really. So we've got that going on. So we've got a root position in the top part, but also a second version in the bottom part. Then we got that added 7th, like that. And then we've got this little sort of bit here in the bass, which just continues, and that just keeps going for a while. It's a lovely polychord. 521, by the way. More 521s, planing. Now 419A, so it's got that sort of flavour of G minor, and then B flat augmented. But there's only actually 4 notes in it, which is interesting. And then another 521, in this case E flat minor and G minor. A little bit of imitation from the violins with a horn. Timpani comes in, trombones come. Lots of augmented chords. E flat with a flat 5. All sort of very Hungarian minor. Just going over that little bit. So yeah, lots of augmented chords. E flat with a flat 5. And then with the D, it becomes a major 7th. As well, another 521. All of those subsets of 6Z19B or 620, both of them. And then it aligns with the next one. Sorry about the little digital click there, which for some reason I was unable to get rid of in the time that I had. Very sorry about that. But anyway, we're going into a sort of interesting little passage. And so a lovely little melody. And it's harmonised in D major. But then it's chromatically altered. With accented passing notes and all sorts of things. So A7 to D. Sort of Neapolitan relationship, we'd call that, because normally chord 2 would be a B minor chord. So in this case, B flat major chord as well. We could call it sort of modal. And then it just shifts up a minor 3rd. And then it goes back to A. But we're expecting it to go back to D, but it doesn't quite. And then with these half diminished chords. So the E half dim is a minor chord substitute, because you're expecting like that. But instead, exactly the same function, but it's a sort of subdominant, really. It's not tonicizing it, it's just making it more of a sort of delayed effect, because we think that it's going to be 5 of D, but it's not, because it's moving away from D, and actually going to eventually to E, completely randomly. So that it's a sort of treading it's here that it changes on the G minor. Notice again, second inversion. He does this so often. It's just amazing. I never realised that second inversions were so important to John Williams, but they really are. It's this sort of, you know, at least sort of having a fourth or a sixth in the bass in terms of spacing. So we've got G minor here. But he really keeps that second inversion going for quite a long time, and then it's only here where it's now a first inversion, and then it moves back to the half diminished. And you're expecting it to go like that, maybe. So in other words, E half dim, back to A, but he doesn't do that. So how does he get out of that? So lots of these fourths. So he's deliberately avoiding any sort of overt sort of triadic thing going on with the long note, and then he gets rid of the harmony entirely by just having a dyad at that point, then an E sus2, and then it just becomes E minor at the end. Really, really interesting. So, what are the takeaways? Well, okay, if you want to get rid of tonality, there are lots of different ways of doing it. This instance, we've got using second inversions. So having a chord which, you know, it's not sort of, you know, a fully diminished chord, so half diminished chord. Making it sort of pan-diatonic. So any note of the scale will do, but focusing on fourths. Focusing on fourths, then keeping the bass note as your root and having a six. Then you've got that sus2 to E minor. Really, really interesting. I just think it's a fascinating thing. And although there's not an enormous amount of fourths in, it does raise a question about where that comes from, what sort of exercises you can do. I have a book, an actual physical book, look at that, which is called Techniques and Materials of Music by Tom Benjamin. I'll put this in the comments section. And chapter 8 deals with quartal and secondal harmony. Now, the usual sort of textbook, certainly in the US, would be Persichetti, also to a certain extent in the UK as well. I have problems with Persichetti. I just can't. I don't think it's very helpful. I think this is much better and much clearer, and it's only on 3 sides of paper. And really, you know, you can analyse them in terms of pitch class sets. Is that helpful? I don't know, really. I'm not sure about the analysis side of things. I think describing things as sus2, sus4, I think that's okay, actually. And I'm sure, coming from a jazz background, in as much as anything else, Williams would probably view them in that way. It's just the collections of notes that we've got. So if I come out of this video, I've also got something on here which is Mathis der Maler, which I found online, a sort of low recording of it by the Vienna Phil. But I've just done a sort of paraphrase. So one of the things in this book was that, you know, suggestions for analysis: study the Hindemith, Mathis der Maler Grablegung. I pronounced that appallingly, so I'm sorry about that to any German speakers. And then analyse the given chords. So actually, I just picked the beginning, not that specific exercise, but I'd recommend, you know, maybe using that book. There's also great stuff on polychords as well. And in terms of, you know, other composers who use chordal harmony, so we got Hindemith, we got Ives, a majority, we got Krennic, Op 39, number 5, Hindemith Ludus Tonalis, Bartók Concerto for Orchestra. We've got Bartók Mikrokosmos, which is always a really good resource for a gamut of 20th century styles. So number 107, Melody in the Mist. Wozzeck Act 2, I think I already mentioned that. And even Dave Brubeck as well, that sort of thing. It's an interesting thing, and I found this really fascinating. So in Grablegung starts off just the strings, And it's very slow. Crotch equals 54. Like that, and ends up in a G sharp. So from C. First of all, the voicing is really interesting. I'm just going to turn that up for some reason. It's quite slow. So the outer parts remain exactly the same, and the second violins are just riffing with the seconds and fourths. So don't forget, quartal quintal harmony doesn't need to recur literally every chord. That would be ridiculous. And also not during the whole piece, because that would also be ridiculous. It's used as a different sort of type of flavour. And deliberate ambiguity. So here we've got these parallel fourths, B and E, A and D, and then both a fourth and fifth. But then we've also got another fourth and fifth, it's just that it's spaced out differently. Everything's moving in step. The only leap is that there in the bass, pretty much. Then it changes, all sharps. So that's a really interesting thing, from E sus4, E sus4, so D sharp 7 sus4. I really like that sort of span. It's just so appealing. There's something very spacious about it. It's almost sort of meditative. A6 with a C sharp. So the sixth being present in that sort of tenor part, let's say. The third is also in the bass, so it's a first inversion sort of thing. And then keeping up all of those sort of spacious notes in the top part. And then a lower auxiliary note with a anticipation note like that. G sharp. Really interesting how it sort of shifts from E to that D sharp 7. And that's a really interesting sort of move. Just go down a semitone, then jump a third. So lots of different sort of possibilities of that quartal thing. You can sort of riff off that. And then another descending bass. That is a feature of Williams's quartal and quintal music. We'll look at more when I found more examples of it. But I just leave things to bear up your sleeve. sus2, sus4, both as well. Add 4, like that, and omit the fifth, like that. G minor with an add 4. Lots of sort of limited leaps as well. The maximum leap, I think, was a third. That's it. And then changes as well. So I'm not sure if this can be explained by Neo-Riemannian theory at all. Not that I know very much about it particularly, but it's just it's movement in fourths and fifths and seconds. So it doesn't avoid all thirds at all. That's not the objective of the exercise. It's to emphasize those intervals, and there's a difference. Emphasis doesn't mean lack of anything else. It just simply means emphasis. So we're ending on that little bit from Mathis der Maler. We'll look at more next week. I will try and do a quick tips on this as well. Maybe I'll just save this last portion just for that, for sort of fourths and fifths. But I want to find some more examples in the Williams repertoire to replicate it. So thank you very much for listening, and see you again next week. Bye.